Should lawyers be responsible for the conduct of their clients? What's brought this on? Well, there's some proposed legislation in a few states in the US, and they're all on similar grounds. And what they do is, some relates to bail and some relates to people who do immigration work. So what's the bail one? Well, the proposed legislation states that if a lawyer obtains bail for somebody, and that somebody then goes on to commit an offence, the lawyer will be personally liable to the victims of that offence, so they can be sued for any harm that occurs. So the idea is that they put the onus for granting bail on the lawyer who applied for it. Now, you couldn't hold the judge responsible because that would be unconstitutional. But the argument is, well, we can hold the lawyers responsible. They don't have to represent these people. Similarly, there's some more proposed legislation that if somebody acts for somebody in an immigration matter and they are allowed into the country and they commit a crime, again, the person who acted for them, the lawyer who acted for them, is personally liable to the victims of any offences, as indeed, in that case, would also be the government official who made the final decision. If it's somebody like an immigration officer, again, if it's a judge, they have complete immunity under the Constitution. So there's no, you cannot bring any form of action as a member of the public against a judge who acts, as a judge. Now, obviously, if a judge runs you over, then you can sue them, and if you're having a row with your neighbour and they're a judge, then that doesn't stop it. But you can't bring any cause of action for sort of anything that is purportedly judicial action, and that's including if the judge well goes beyond their powers or does something they shouldn't do. The idea is it's to stop the judiciary just constantly being hassled, and the theory is that, well, there is a mechanism for the government to impeach or remove judges. In the US, they can impeach judges. Over here, it's effectively the judiciary themselves can say, I think it's time you retired, mate. But that's the idea. Now, it's probably political posturing. I mean, who knows whether or not this will be passed. But it brings in this interesting concept as to should lawyers, for a Freudian slip there, should lawyers, pick and choose their clients? Should we be more careful about whom we represent? And this is like quite an old concept. I don't know if anybody's ever seen A Man for All Seasons, which is absolutely brilliant, especially the film. The play's really good as well. I actually acted in a Robert Bolt play once. I played, what was I? I was Oswald Fitz-Oblong, the People's Choice. Anyway, you can go Google that. But in that, Sir Thomas More, he has this thing where he's basically sticking to the law. He says, I can't go against my conscience. I am the chief lawyer of the country, and you're asking me to sign something that I think is wrong in the law. And his friends are all going, look, this isn't going to do you a lot of good. You're just annoying the king. It doesn't make a world of difference. Everybody else has come on board with this. As one of his friends says, he goes, look, I'm not a scholar. I don't know if she's divorced or not, if she's married or not, but I'm just going to sign the bleeding thing. And he says, well, no, I can't. It's against, the whole purpose of having laws is we have laws. And they say, well, sometimes you've just got to be pragmatic and go behind them. But as he says, yes, but if all the law, I said, I would defend the devil with the law, because if all the laws are struck down and then they come after you, where are you going to hide now that all the laws have been struck down? Similarly, John Adams, to go back to the US, who became the second president of the United States, he famously represented the troops involved in the, quote, Boston Massacre. The shot that was heard around the world, although a lot of shots claim that. But in that case, as you may know, some Americans were having a bit of a row with some, British troops. They're throwing snowballs at them, and the troops opened fire on them. And two people, I think it was two people, it might have been one person, was unalived. And I do apologise for all this sort of, YouTube euphemism, all the red rum stuff. And I was getting confused because people go, oh, it's The Shining. I forgot about The Shining reference. I was thinking of the Scouse racehorse. But yeah, basically, some people ended up unalived, as the kids say, and the soldiers were prosecuted. But John Adams, one of the founding fathers, about as American as you can get, he defended them. And he said, no, everybody's entitled to a defence within the law. You have to prosecute this. And the trial lasted for about a week. Now, some people have commented and said it wasn't exactly the best prosecution in the world. Also, they had that jury voir dire concept over there, where you could sort of vet jurors. It's probably fair that Adams managed to get a lot of people on the jury who were effectively loyalists at the time, or on the side of the British troops. But he defended these people. He got the officer off, Because his argument was, well, yes, they were throwing snowballs, but they were also walking, with billy clubs. So, it was not unreasonable to think that some violence was in the offing. So he got the actual commanding officer off on the grounds that actually there was nothing to suggest he'd actually given the order. And he got all the troops off, bar 2 who were done for manslaughter, and got relatively light sentences. But his argument was, the whole point is, the laws have to protect anybody or they protect nobody. I mean, to quote Larry Flint, he fabulously said, if the Constitution protects a scumbag like me, imagine what it can do for the rest of you. But over here, of course, we have the cab rank rule. And there's been a lot of criticism of that, but what is the cab rank rule? Basically, it only applies to barristers. And we act like taxis, in the same way that theoretically if a taxi is on the rank and you get in it, they have to take you to wherever you wish to go if you're willing to pay for it. They can't pick and choose their rides, nor can they pick or choose where they go to. So it's like, I was just knocking off, mate, so I'm not going south the river, I'm heading home now. It's like tough. The job is you take everybody. And it's the same for barristers. So we have to take on any client, if we're instructed through solicitors, regardless of what we think of them, their case, their political causes, their underlying personality, and indeed what that might do to us in terms of reputation or even physical violence. I mean, that's why we wear the wigs and gowns and stuff, because they give you an element of sort of anonymity and disguise. And like I say, I've been very grateful for that. Once I remember stood at the train station, Harrow train station, we were all stood there, luckily, not being recognised by some people who were really annoyed with how a particular trial had gone. And it's like, phew, thank goodness they don't recognise us, because that could have got very, very messy. But that's the idea. You have to accept the work. Now, it used to be that legal aid was deemed to be an appropriate fee. But they changed that. I mean, that must be about 15 years ago now, where they said, OK, we accept that legal aid rates are rubbish and you can't be forced to work for legal aid rates. So now, because that was what we call the deeming provision, if somebody was on legal aid, it was deemed to be sufficient payment. And people are going, well, no now, because it's like £6.25 an hour and I'm not working for that. But people said, well, you can get round cab rank, because you can always just have a word with your clients. If a case comes in and you don't like it, you can just say, oh, I'm busy that week, or just tell them my diary's full or something like that. And people have commented and said, you do see people who only represent one side or the other. There's lots of human rights lawyers who will perhaps only seem to act for one side. But if they were instructed, they would have to, and indeed most of the people I know would act for the other side. We get this a lot because we've got a little animal rights team in Chambers, which apparently I'm now the head of. That'll teach me to go to the loo in the middle of a Zoom meeting. And we get instructions all the time because we have this purported expertise in sort of animal welfare law. So I act for all the undercover activists, as you know, who do all these sort of secret filming and go in, and usually that's a defamation thing, because they go in and they report back and then they get threatened with defamation proceedings. But there's also regulatory stuff. Our gang, we do private prosecutions against all these sort of dodgy abattoirs and farms. But at the same time, we quite often get instructions from people who are in trouble for animal welfare stuff, abattoirs, farms, meat processing places, and we have to act for them. We can't say, well, we don't approve. So we actually go in there and we do the best we can. We do the best we can for them. We don't sort of go, oh, we'll go in there and just swing the lead a little bit because we don't want them to win. We fight that case, with full vigour within the confines of the law and the rules of evidence and the rules of procedure, etc. I mean, we have to do that. Our first duty is obviously to the court, but our second duty is to our lay client. And the mere fact, we disagree with them, that's not a reason to not represent them. But so like I say, people have made a legitimate comment. First of all, how in practice is the cab rank quite as strict? And I personally think it is. I'm sure there are some people who do sort of, find a way of turning down work without, but I think that's mainly just because they just can't be bothered with it, rather than it's anything ideological. It's like, I don't really fancy a sort of 2-week trial in Durham or something like that. So, that's one aspect. But the other aspect is, should lawyers act for like a big corporate companies, like act for oil companies or companies doing environmental damage? And again, Paul Poundsland, friend of mine, I'm contractually obliged to say, don't agree with Paul on everything. But he's very against the cab rank rule. He says, no, because you've got to, act with, you've got a conscience, you've got to be responsible. And if you are acting for these big companies, even within the law, if the law's not fair or the law's biased to them or they've got more money or they can influence Parliament, they can lobby, well, it's not an even playing field to start with. So, us coming on board isn't really helping that. But I'm really interested in your comments on this, about what you think of it, because You know, I mean, you know, the people who represent that Malkinson guy, the guy got after 19 years for being falsely accused. Well, at the time, you know, he was, you know, it was on the press. He was clearly a grapist to get around the algorithm and stuff. So at the time, probably people got a lot of stick for representing somebody like him, but it turned out 19 years later to be demonstrably innocent. So what about all sorts of other people? I mean, but some people say, well, you shouldn't represent, you know, if you represent people, migrants, then, you know, you're responsible for anything that happens, and you shouldn't be doing that work, and if anything happens, it's your responsibility. And similarly with the corporate stuff. But I'll be very interested in this. Also, the cab rank rule doesn't apply to if you do direct access work. I do what's called direct public access. I'm sort of licensed by the Bar Standards Board that I can work without a solicitor. Interestingly there, cab rank doesn't apply, so I can pick and choose clients. That, though, is more for, well, if you're working directly with a client, it can be quite difficult because what's the division of labour? I mean, when a solicitor's in the mix, the solicitor can sort of act as the filter. We always say, you know, solicitors take your money, barristers make you cry. So sometimes it's a lot easier to be a bit more detached and say, look, mate, this is a rubbish claim, or this is, you know, you've got no defence to this, or this is how we're going to have to run it, and I'm not going to call you as a witness because you're terrible, and, you know, you really mess the case up, so it's better off without you. It's just nicer to have, you know, somebody in the middle, so you can sort of write the advice and say, you go to the solicitor, you go through it with the client, because I don't think we're going to be very happy about it. So cab rank doesn't actually apply there. But other than that, it generally does. Now, it also doesn't apply to foreign work. So when people have been criticised for acting for dodgy regimes abroad, then they've said, you know, people have rightly said, well, cab rank doesn't apply, you could have turned that gig down. But there's lots of people who, even if cab rank didn't exist as a formal rule, would still abide by it. And I'm one of those people. If cab rank was abolished tomorrow, I would still apply the cab rank rule, because I think it's one of the most fundamental, basic things for making sure people have access to justice. Because at the end of the day, there's either a judge or 12 good men and ladies of true to make the decisions about who's right or wrong. I don't think it should be on us to filter. I mean, it's the classic, you know, it's like, how can you represent somebody when you know they're guilty? Well, it's not for us to know whether they're guilty or not. We might have suspicions. I mean, most of us don't actually. We just look at the evidence and we're very detached. You might sit with the client and say, look, you know, this bit of evidence here is going to be hard to overcome, or have you got an answer for this, or what are you going to say, you know, about this element? You might be a jury are highly suspicious about that. If somebody actually admits it to you and says, yes, I did it, can you still defend them? Yes, you can, but you can't put forward a positive case. It is, remember, for the prosecution to prove the case to the requisite standard so that the jury are sure, or the magistrates are sure. So you can test that evidence. So to give an example, if the issue is ID, I can sort of say to the eyewitness, how far away were you standing? It was dark that night, wasn't it? You weren't wearing your glasses, it was a bit drizzly, the lighting wasn't very good, a bus drove in front of you at the, you know, inappropriate moments, you didn't see everything. I can quite legitimately suggest that the ID is unreliable, but what I cannot do is go that one step further where somebody's told me they did it and say, so I suggest to you it wasn't actually my client you saw. Whereas if they've actually, you know, not told you they did it, you can say that. You can say, well, I suggest that's not my client, because they are, they're maintaining their innocence. So by definition, it can't be them. If they've told you it was them, you can't go any further with that. So, but it's, you know, it's still for the prosecution, to prove their cases. And like I say, it's not for us to act as a filter. Well, that's my view anyway. I don't often give my personal views, but that is one that I have very strong views about the benefits of the cab rank rule. Notwithstanding, I'm sure there are some abuses of it, and I'm sure not everybody abides by it. But I think it is a very, very, very good thing, because I think the worst thing in the world is if you've got an additional filter or hurdle before you have access to justice, which is to persuade a barrister that not only is your case sort of worth doing, that we won't get yelled at for doing it. So there you go. But let me know in the comments what you think about this, because I'm always interested in your comments, and also to give me ideas for future videos. But as always, hope you found that vaguely useful, vaguely interesting, vaguely accurate.